Welcome to Blackbird episode number 19. My name is James, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Michael Rectenwald. If you're familiar with libertarian podcasts, you have undoubtedly heard Michael's story, so we might get into that a little bit, but I wanted to talk more with Michael about some of his scholarship and popular writing, especially surrounding the Google Archipelago and the current state of sort of mass surveillance and cancel culture and that sort of thing. It reminded me a little bit of Foucault, the postmodernist philosopher, so I wanted to pick his brain about that as well, because he is a scholar of postmodernism, although unlike Thad Russell, who was on a previous episode of the show, he is not a proponent of that particular train of thought. So I thought it would be a very interesting conversation, and I think that you will enjoy it as well. Before we get started with Michael, let me tell you once again about BeYou Enterprises. BeYou Enterprises, of course, is run by Juliet Nail, a friend of the show, a friend of the movement. She is a yoga instructor who will help you get back into an integral relationship with your own body. Through yoga and breathing and mindfulness techniques, Juliet can help you on the road to wellness, whether you're an individual interested in one-on-one training or you are a business owner or a team manager interested in offering a wellness benefit for your employees. Juliet would be the perfect addition to you and your team's lives. So head over to BeYouEnterprises.com to get in touch with Juliet. She will be thrilled to hear from you. And with that, here is my interview with Michael Rectenwald. Michael, thanks for joining me today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure thing. So I wanted to have you on to talk about the Google Archipelago and censorship and all that stuff, and just sort of talk about what you think's going on and what's still to come. Being that this is the first time you've been on this show, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for the audience?
Okay, yeah, Michael Rectenwald, and I'm a writer and former NYU professor, but taught in many other institutions. Right now, I'm writing for the Mises Institute and several other outlets, giving talks, different universities and other settings, and basically predicted everything that's happening right now in Google Archipelago. Basically, in that book, I argued that the big tech represented kind of like the leading edge and ideological communications apparatus of the corporate socialist agenda that's being foisted on us. And when I say corporate socialism, I don't refer to Bernie Sanders' definition of corporate welfare. I'm talking about corporate-run socialism, and in connection with the state, corporate state-run socialism. So I predicted that in Google Archipelago, and I think it's coming to pass as we speak.
That's certainly something that we've talked about on this show before with Vin Armani, especially. He's got this cyclical view of history that actually he's derived it from someone else, and he's gonna have a book coming out pretty soon, and I'll probably have him back on to talk about that. But this idea that we're shifting from a politician class to a corporate class as our sort of overlords, and it's really been going on since the progressive era. We're just seeing it now come to a head. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's a shift to, there's this corporate class is kind of running what I call their governmentalities. They are now virtually the state. So I have a issue with libertarianism about this because, the state is the evil, but what is the state? That's the big question. And to my way of thinking, the state is whatever performs state functions. And these corporate oligarchs are performing state functions.
What do you see as the state functions that they're performing? I mean, they're not sending troops overseas to war or raising police forces, but
they're conducting nonstop propaganda. They are controlling speech, and they are going to be further involved in controlling self-determination movement of people. Their ability to do anything will be basically filtered through these corporate players. Like in California, they recently released a video in which they show that Microsoft is going to be determining effectively whether students can go back to school. There'll be the way Microsoft will run this kind of vaccine certificate program that will basically give clearance or not to students to return to school. These are the kind of functions that that these corporations are undertaking, state functions in effect. Censorship's not supposed to be a function of the state in the United States, but it's been the function of states, of authoritarian states in history. And so they're performing the functions that authoritarian states have performed in the past.
Right. And even on a grander scale, just regulating the public square, so to speak. It's, we're not meeting in agoras and shouting from street corners because that looks crazy. What we're doing is tweeting.
Right.
And publishing on Google's within Google's algorithms and on Facebook and things like that.
Right. They basically are the public square. And you said it right. Outside of the digital realm, it's meaningless to expression is virtually meaningless. Or inefficacious. It has no effect. Yeah. So they have, they've cordoned off the public square and are in complete control of it. So they are determining what's sayable and what's not.
Well, and even in the political realm now, if the wrong person, as we've seen the last several years, if the wrong person is gaining influence politically, then all it takes is a concentrated effort against that person to turn the world against them,
to disappear them.
Yeah. You are very familiar with the work of Foucault.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
The reason that I even emailed you was because I had this notion that we are headed for what I called a free range panopticon.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of describe what the panopticon is? I know that Foucault didn't obviously originate that idea. It was, a 19th century sociologist.
Yes, it was Jeremy Bentham's. Jeremy Bentham's architectural model was the panopticon, and Foucault coined the term panopticism.
Okay.
The panopticon is the architectural model is like a circular building with a central tower from which the observer can see the prisoners, but the prisoners cannot see the observer or the guard, and they likewise. The prisoners, not knowing whether they're under surveillance or not, effectively internalize surveillance. They become the means, as Foucault put it, they become the means of their own subjection. Panopticism is an all-seeingness, a seeing of everything, a total surveillance system. And we're headed towards that with reference to the smart city models that are being rolled out, that will be rolled out throughout the West based on what China's done with their 50 smart cities and their total surveillance state. But it's also not just part of the smart city, it's also with social media. Basically, the whole internet is going to be a panopticon. So while now, as I said in Google Archipelago, now we go on the internet, in the future, we will be in the internet. The internet will be ubiquitous and it will be everywhere, and we'll be inside of it in effect. We'll be artifacts within the internet and data that can be tracked in the internet as such.
So the Internet of Things will eventually become the Internet of People.
Yes, the internet. We are one of the. We number among the things that will be on the Internet of Things.
Well, and like Definitely. You always hear, if it's free, then you're the product. And so I excuse me, I assume that Facebook and Google just see us as commodities rather than as individual.
I think we're more than commodities. That's part of it, but we're also subjects to to be disciplined and to be controlled. Because part of this corporate model, this corporate socialist model, is not strictly to make money, but also to have governing powers over the subjects. And this is what they're undertaking.
Can you talk a little bit about smart cities? I'm not sure that the audience is super familiar with what they are.
Yeah, I mean, smart cities are these, these ambient surveillance cities in which every move you make is tracked, traced, visualized, picked up through LED and other scanners, so that your every move is known, and they track you through your device is effectively connected to your handheld device or whatever, maybe soon an implant, is connected to the ambient Wi-Fi environment in which you move, so that everything is known and every move you make is tracked and traced. Furthermore, your movement is circumscribed by virtue of your social credit score. So the social credit score is a kind of passport that allows you certain movement, and it's circumscribed depending upon the person's social credit score rating. And this could be imported into the West vis-a-vis medical passports or vaccine passports, if you will. And those will be used, they'll probably be digital, and they'll be used to determine just what kind of movements you can make, what you're allowed to do. So that instead of having to show a passport to enter a building, you could, alarms could go off if you try to enter a building if you're not permitted vis-a-vis your medical passport. So the social credit score system is part of the smart city. Of course, it depends on 5G, and 5G gives it the capability of monitoring and tracking all this data. And you're a piece of data in the internet and or the cloud, and that's effectively how it works.
Is it being sold as a green initiative, or is it more about public safety and health and all of these?
Yeah, they're selling it on the basis of what they're talking about is like sustainable, but also more livable space, city space, so that it controls traffic flows. Since it'll know where cars are and all that, everything is a piece of data on the internet. It will be able to make smart city living, which means like the city itself is intelligent, and so it allows for more efficient, more supposedly pleasurable habitation. So, you'll hear them talk about traffic flows, parking, congestion of any kind of people in spaces, and it'll direct people away from certain, bottlenecks and things like that, and also determine water flow and other resource flows, so that everything is regulated in effect through this smart city.
I'm looking at Google or Alphabet, I guess Google's parent company. They've got a separate company called Sidewalk Labs, and, and it's got all of these devices and mechanisms to bring this about. And there's one called Pebble, which they point out is a privacy preserving vehicle sensor that enables better parking and curbside management.
Exactly.
And the fact that they point out that it's privacy preserving tells me that it is anything but.
Right. What that means is when they use the term privacy, it means they already have the data.
Right. Yeah. So where do we go? What's the solution for people who want to maybe not resist, but just not be part of it? Or should we be trying to resist it?
That's a good question. I just engaged in this debate yesterday with a piece I put out on the Mises Institute about whether we should, whether people should retreat and set up sort of enclaves that are separate from all this, or whether they should stay and fight. And I argue that we can't leave the nation or the world as a virtual concentration camp for the rest. I think that's it's a very monastic impulse to go and resist it or to retreat and to sort of form these libertarian, if you will, enclaves that are separate and parallel to the system and that are independent of it. We may not be able to, first of all, it may not be possible, especially if digital currency is instituted. It could be impossible to buy anything unless you're in the system, unless the purveyor of the good is also approved, and whether you are approved to buy it. And the black market could be closed down. And effectively, if we get into a cashless society, this is a way of determining everything you're doing on commercially. So it becomes difficult to escape. So this idea of escaping it, I think, is not really the option. The option is to not circumvent, but to derail it, to undermine it, to resist it, and to continue to point to what it's up to. First of all, a lot of this is happening surreptitiously, and so it's important to keep appraised of what exactly is going on, what's afoot, and then to apply pressure at those various points in order to diffuse what's happening.
So kind of a mix between agorism and maybe just trying to win over hearts and minds?
That's part of it.
Sure.
Knowledge is important. Dissemination of knowledge. And of course, this is risky because you could be, first of all, targeted, but moreover, or I should say initially, you're discredited. So, you'll be called every name in the book, so from conspiracy theorists to white supremacists, or both. Because
not to mention wanting to kill grandma.
Yeah, that's right. Wanting to kill grandma. And anything that you say that isn't in line with the agenda is going to be ridiculed and scrutinized and ridiculed. And this is one of the tactics to effect the order that's being imposed.
So are you familiar with freedom cells, the movement that's sort of emerging right now? What do you think about that?
Tell me more.
Sure.
Well,
so freedom cells is it's sort of an agorist movement. Not explicitly so. Maybe it is actually explicitly agorist, where groups of liberty-minded folks within a geographic area collaborate in engaging in black and gray market activities, helping one another through like mutual aid, and just trying to separate from the state as much as possible. And that according to now agorists and traditional anarcho-capitalists might differ on whether Google and Facebook and so forth constitute the state at this point. I think agorists fall more on your side than on, say, Ayn Rand's side. But I think probably if Rand were still around, she would probably be hopefully wise enough to see where we're coming from at the very least.
Right. So it's not a John Galt movement exactly. It's
right.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's exactly the kind of thing I recommend in vis-a-vis fiction in Thought Criminal. And I call them networks of thought deviationists. And these networks are a way of communicating and supporting each other. And, their transactions are encrypted, and they have developed, really solid encryption and other methods to avoid detection and to avoid connection, in this case, to the collective mind, as I call it, which is this vast database and processing system that's effectively the combination of all the clouds and in the world into a singular cloud. But that's the novel. But I think the novel is kind of a blueprint for how to do this, to how to, not how to do it, but what to do. And I think those freedom cells are the right idea, definitely.
That's awesome. I forgot that you had written a novel. It was just published a couple of months ago in December. I'll make sure to link to that.
Yeah.
And basically, it's about an AI neuroscientist, which our sci-fi fans will probably love.
Yeah.
Speaking of your books, talk a little bit about the Google Archipelago beyond what we've already discussed. What's sort of the thesis of that? How did you know that this was coming?
I don't know. I just had a sense of how the patterns were forming. And so the thesis is basically that the system under construction is corporate socialism. And okay, so I'll tell you how I got to it. One of the things I study is ideology. And what I was trying to figure out is, why are corporations, especially these big tech corporations, why are they promulgating socialist ideology? What is the function of that? I tried to figure it out. Like, I don't buy that it's just that all the people that work there were indoctrinated in schools and so on and so forth that taught them socialism and socialist ideology. I think it works in their favor. And then I tried to figure out, how would it work? And then I thought, well, it would work if you were trying to create a two-tiered system where you have actually existing socialism on the ground and corporate oligarchs in charge. And everything about their ideology and everything about their actions really corresponds to this. And so I developed this thesis that the Google Archipelago, or big digital, as I call them, that's the big digital tech producers, are in effect a leading edge and ideological communications apparatus and disciplinary mechanism for establishing this corporate socialist model. And that's what the book goes into. It treats things like censorship and the differential treatment of particular political viewpoints and the promotion of woke ideology and all that. But it ties it into a broader theme, which has to do with this corporate socialist model. And so that's really where it goes.
So have you started to separate yourself from these social media companies and Google and the like, or are you still tweeting and Facebooking like?
Well, Facebook has me banned for now.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Well, what was your offense? My mom got banned for questioning the election because she's a super Trumpy. So
I got banned for calling a socialist a socialist. It was called hate speech.
Oh goodness.
So this was an avowed socialist. And I said, well, that's because you're a socialist. That's why that did it.
Wow.
I can't get any traction on Twitter. I don't know what's going on there. I don't have as many followers as I should have. And I can't get any traction there. So I tweet, but I don't have high expectations for anything. I'm still on Facebook, except on a ban for, I think, 30 days. And I think my position there philosophically and methodologically is to try to retain whatever beachheads we can and not abdicate territory until we're thrown off of them. But on the other hand, I recognize the surveillance that's going on those sites. So I'm out there anyway, so I don't think there's anything hidden. There's nothing about my views that are, at all clandestine. I think it's all quite out there, so I don't try to hide anything. And what I do avoid is pure partisan stuff because that's what they look at first, like with your mother. Um, Support of Trump and so overt. What I'm doing is opposing their agenda and the leftism in general. So that is harder for their algorithms and people to pick up, I think.
I have been fond of saying it's our enemy, the state, not our enemy, the left. Do you think that that's an accurate statement, or have they just become so intertwined that
Well,
left and state are now basically synonymous?
I think they're now synonymous. The statism is leftism, first of all. Now, not all statism is leftism, but all leftism is statism. So, uh, in that sense, I think the enemy is the state, but it's the left. It's a leftist state. That's the enemy.
So
We're dealing with leftists.
what about like a hippie commune that is, for all intents and purposes, anarchistic and completely separated from the state? Would you consider them not of the left? Would you consider them of the right?
Yeah, I wouldn't consider them of the current left at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just consider them good. More power to them. I mean, I don't care what you do at all, really. And but the more power to leftists, anarchists, if they would call themselves leftists, hippies, dropouts of all sorts. I mean, they have my complete support.
Cool. Um, Completely shifting subjects. Where do you go for news? Or do you follow the news? Is it even worth it?
Yeah, I read all over the place. So, I mean, I just get it everywhere I can and take everything with a grain of salt. But I have to say the Epoch Times is a pretty good paper because they're opposed to the CCP first of all, and China is the model for all this. So China, I think, is the model for the corporate socialist agenda that they're undertaking. I think basically the oligarchy looked at China and said, "Yeah, that's a good plan." They still have profit, and they still have, but they have this totalitarian control over the population, and I think that's the model. That's the corporate socialist model in action already. So since the Epoch Times is an enemy of the CCP, they're a friend of mine, and they basically are trying to uphold the principles of classical liberalism, I think.
Wow, I had always just thought of the Epoch Times as like a kooky conspiracy theory
Oh no, not at
paper.
all.
So
They're doing regular news.
cool. That's good to
I think
hear.
that's probably because a lot of them are Falun Gong practitioners who fled China because Falun Gong was persecuted. The Falun Gong practitioners have been persecuted in China, and if you believe the Falun Gong followers, they've also harvested their organs.
Gosh.
Yeah. So that's probably why it's been considered. Of course, Wikipedia will tell you that it's a kook site, and the New York Times will tell you that too. So
Yeah, and as red pilled as I like to think of myself as, I am definitely prone to falling for stuff like that. So it's good to hear. It's good to hear from somebody reputable that the Epoch Times is reputable, because I've always just kind of rolled my eyes at them, and a lot of it has to do with the ads that they run. The guy in those ads is kind of cheesy.
Yeah, the ads might be cheesy. I agree with that, but the reporting's pretty good.
That's cool. I'll link to them
Yeah.
just so people can kind of get a taste for what it is. Just in case anybody has somehow escaped the ads on YouTube.
The other site I would say I'm gonna say that I will go out on a limb here, and I think Infowars is actually a good site, and they cover a lot of good stuff in advance of other people, and it's not all kooky. Now, Alex Jones is out there, but in many ways, he's been right.
Yeah, well, and also he's a character. He's playing a character.
Yeah,
and he tells us that, like, he lets you know that
right
when he's not on, he's putting on an act.
Right, it's an act. It's a publicity stunt, and he's a card. He's an interesting guy. I mean, his Trumpism's over the top, but they pick up a lot of other stuff that's worthwhile reading. It's a good collection. What do you call it? What do they call those sites that gather a bunch of different sources?
Like a aggregator?
Aggregator, yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll link to the Epic Times. I'll probably not link to InfoWars because I don't
Yeah,
want to get
no,
my show
link to
canceled.
InfoWars. Yeah, that's right.
But if you're listening, give him another shot. Because you're right. Alex Jones used to be, I mean, back in the Ron Paul days, Jones was totally on our side. And I think,
right.
I mean, he's fun to watch. I had a relationship, or like a budding relationship, and because I told the person that while I don't agree with Alex Jones on everything, I'm glad he exists.
Yeah, exactly.
They never talked to me again. So it's definitely a hot button. But yeah, give him a shot. Okay, what else? You've got this article, Fighting Totalitarianism, Rothbard versus Monasticism. And I think this is really cool. It strikes a balance between the complete separatism of some, I guess, agorist survivalists, maybe.
Yeah,
like
right.
Nicole Sauce, who I love and who's been on the show, is a proponent of that sort of separatist mentality, where she's got her community and it works for her, and that's great. She lives out in the country. But I started this podcast. It was originally called the Urban Agorist Podcast.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the idea that I like.
Yeah, me too. I don't want to have to leave the city if I can, or at the very least, I don't have to drive 2 hours to get here.
Yeah, exactly. I think the idea is to be in these cells that are resistant, that are somehow clandestine or undiscoverable through, by the network, by the infosphere, and then still serve a function. They serve a function for survival, for communications, for interchange and all that. That's the model that I was actually working under with the thought criminal, but they tried to form a parallel processing system, but found that it really wasn't possible, and they were able to foil the collective mind and destroy it. So, or at least its function.
Man, I can't wait to read this book. I'm really looking forward to it. I have the Amazon thing up, so I'll buy it on Kindle and check it out. So I think that you should probably get involved with Freedom Cells, because it sounds like it's right up your alley. They're everywhere. Have you fled New York, or are you still there?
Yeah, I'm in Pittsburgh. I fled New York.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right. A little bit less going on there, I guess. I think
it's less, first of all, it's less desolation. New York is desolation row at this point.
I can't believe the photos that I'm seeing from New York.
Yeah, it's a hellhole. So Pittsburgh seems to be resilient to a lot of things, a lot of pressures so far. And it doesn't feel dangerous in terms of, woke oppression on the streets and elsewhere.
Yeah, the people of Pittsburgh are, I wouldn't call them conservative, but they're definitely, they kind of march to their own drummer, I think.
They're recalcitrant, and this keeps them resistant to a lot of things. They don't even care about all, so that I like.
Right. Okay, great. Well, I think I'm about out of questions for you. Do you have, it's cool. It's been a great conversation. Do you have anything to plug other than the books?
Well, I'd like to, check out my website and look at these articles on the Great Reset. I've got 6 of them, I think, up there now.
Is that just michaelrectenwald.com?
Yeah, michaelrectenwald.com. I haven't gotten into, but now that you've pointed me towards Freedom Cells, I haven't gotten into solutions yet, I'm still painting the picture. It's a pretty difficult, complex agenda, and the way that technology fits into it is is a whole another conundrum,
Yeah.
this fourth industrial revolution bit. So I haven't got to that part yet either. So yeah, those things and the books and that's about it. And I do keep a collection of all my interviews up there, and this will be up there after you post it. And communicate with me, contact me.
All right.
I'm interested in hearing from people.
We will do that, and I'll link to your Twitter for what it's worth. Because
I'm still tweeting. I did get 1,000. I got 1,000 hits on a article about the lawsuit being filed against the coronavirus lockdown people, the people responsible for that. That got a lot of hits, but that doesn't do me any good. I mean, I don't know if that particular lawsuit is going anywhere, but they would also want to do a Nuremberg trial for the lockdowners,
Oh no!
Because they said it's the biggest crime against humanity.
That'd be great. I'm curious who would run it, given that all of the people who would qualify to run a Nuremberg style thing would probably fall.
Are part of or the people that should be on trial.
Yeah. So cool. Well, my hope is that we see a big backlash against the current state of things in the next year or two, because
I hope so.
It happened after the Iraq War, which was the last big event of my lifetime anyway. So we'll see. Thanks again for joining me, Michael.
My pleasure. Hope that was worth it.
Yeah, totally. It was a great conversation. Thanks. All right. Thanks again to Professor Michael Rectenwald for joining me today. Of course, I will be sure to leave any pertinent links in the show notes. Thanks also to Juliet and BeYou Enterprises for sponsoring this episode. Head over to BeYouEnterprises.com to get in touch with them. And of course, if you haven't already, be sure that you're subscribed on Substack. Go to blackbird.substack.com to receive email updates for every episode of this show, along with any written content that I produce. And wherever you listen to this podcast, hit the subscribe button, leave ratings, reviews, thumbs up, that sort of thing. And be sure to share the show to help get the word out. Thanks again, and I will see you on the next episode of Blackbird. Until then, live free.